Hello, Crispin. Nice to
Hello,
connect with you today.
nice to see you too.
I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you on the topic of the five elements and how they manifest in us, how they influence our lives. Now, you are a very successful practitioner. You have a practice in London um, as an acupuncturist and shiatsu practitioner. And I remember having an initial conversation with you on this topic several years ago. And I was absolutely fascinated and quite surprised to discover that my element was not what I thought it was, based on astrology, that is. So you explained to me a little bit then about this whole understanding that you use in your work. And I thought it was very useful, very valuable. And now, through this crisis that we're going through, I think it is a fantastic opportunity for everyone to learn more about this topic, to support well-being and so on. But please tell us a little bit more about your background and what you're talking to us about today.
Sure. Well, I've been practicing complementary medicine for over 20 years, but I've been an acupuncturist for 14 years. And I trained in a combined school of the five elements and also what is known as traditional Chinese medicine, which is the main type of acupuncture that's practiced in China. But the five elements model of acupuncture is so fascinating because it teaches us so much about ourselves, but it also teaches us about others. It allows us to be very compassionate with other people because we learn so much about how uh, they react with their environments, but also in particular with big life events. And obviously, when people come to me for acupuncture, they're almost always looking for change. They're looking for a change from pain, from trauma, from big life events that they're just trying to grapple with and understand and move on from. And the five element model gives you so much insight into how people react to big events, big crises.
Fascinating, thank you. Now, it's important to understand that this particular five element model is not the same as you might find in other systems. So, would you explain to us this particular system that you're working with and how could we understand the elements in it?
Okay, so it's not like you can look up in a book and find out that you're air or water or fire like one can with astrology. It doesn't work like that. The theory is that um, the, the the five elements are in all of us. So all of us have the five elements within us, but one element in particular predominates the way we react to things. And this may come about through hereditary. So we may inherit our element from our parents, or it comes about from a very early age, less than 5 years old. We start developing an element within ourselves that becomes our predominant element, and it is that element that dictates so much of our lives.
And would this show up in our physical constitution or how would it show up?
It does, but the main way I use it is how it reacts with us emotionally. So it's very much our emotional DNA. That's how we can look upon it.
Okay, so would you like to take us through them? I have an image I can
Yeah,
share.
sure.
Okay, let me share my screen here. And oops. Okay, so here's an image.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay. So
all ears.
these are the five elements. Um, and they all not only do they relate to us the way we respond emotionally, but they also relate to nature. So you can see in the middle there it says the five elements of nature. We are currently in the wood energy. Wood energy is relates to spring. The fire energy relates to summer. Earth energy is kind of late summer, early autumn. Metal is autumn towards winter, and finally water is relates to the midwinter. So now we're just coming out of the water element, which is winter. It's when nature is at its most still or most yin, and we're now in the wood element, which is when the the, the shoots of the leaves are starting to come out, and it's a very exciting time. Obviously, it's a time of great change. Probably the most dramatic change of the year is wood, and it has a great strength, a great surge of energy, and then uh, this will be replaced by the fire energy, which is summer energy. Around the time of mid to late May is when the fire energy comes about.
Okay, so I guess it would be useful for us to know what the environment is or what energies we're working with in that sense, but how do we identify our own element, which element we ourselves are?
Okay. Um, okay. So let me start with wood because we're in the wood energy now. Um, when people come to me for treatment, I try and determine what energy is within them that is the most predominant. How do they how do they respond to events? So wood wood is a very strong. I mean, they're all very strong, but wood has a great strength and purpose about it. So often people who present that to me, who have a great strength of justice, comes hand in hand with wood. Um, so people who um, feel very strongly about campaigns such as the environment, or any sort of uh, campaign is very tied in with wood elements. So wood people take justice to be very, very important with them. That they're often very strong campaigners as well, as I said, and they're also great planners as well. They spend a lot of energy planning and making, having ambitions, and just being very organized with their lives as well.
Very
Um,
interesting, very interesting. I'm wondering if I know anyone who has a wood element. Um, I can think of some people like this. Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They often in their tone of voice. This so not only is emotion a good means of diagnosis, but also the way people talk. And I'm not just saying the way people talk. I'm just saying that their voices often give you a very strong indication. So would often have a rather clipped tone of voice. I'm going to put a voice on now where it's like quite serious, and they make strong points and things like that. You often get that with politicians, actually. When you listen to politicians, people are often quite clipped in their tone of voice, like this, and that gives you an indication that they feel very strongly about things. So yeah, politicians is quite a good example for Woods because they feel very strongly about society or issues that really affect a lot of people. And so they would often go into something like politics where they can really use their energy to make changes for things.
Wonderful. Wow. Okay, what's next?
They often also that when you ask me about their physical body,
Oh,
woods can often be quite slender, perhaps even gaunt. Gaunt is overstating it, perhaps, but like they often have very um, strong features, and um, they would often be very slender in their frame as well, so they wouldn't put weight on. There are other elements that might do that, but would often they're almost athletic in their look.
I'm very interested, even as you're saying that, to find out, would you say that each element has some strong um, qualities and some weaker qualities?
Yes, very much
Okay.
so. Very much so. Um, all of these elements, it's like their strength, but conversely, it's their weakness as well. So it's like the yin and yang polarity. Um, when they're in really good health, it's like, wow, fantastic. You know, woods can be the most wonderful people to have on your side. I remember I was buying a house, flat rather, and it was quite a complicated situation. My solicitor was wood, no doubt about it. And I just felt so lucky to have her on my side, because she was fighting tooth and nail for my corner. And I just thought, wow, God, I'm lucky that she's on my side, because if she was not on my side, it would have been quite scary. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great example. Thank you. Okay. Which element is next then?
I'm going to go to fire, because
Okay.
fires are often the most noticeable of the elements. Now, you think of fire. It's you can't avoid it. It's a wonderful thing to be around. Fires are often the life of the party. If you go to a party and someone's making jokes and being really engaging and really charismatic, that's often fires. They like to be the center of attention often, and they're great with it. Absolutely. You know, a lot of comedians might be fires, just really engaging people, but that's their strength. Their weakness is the fire can go out, and sometimes when you're around a fire, there's no energy at all. It's like they either burn very brightly or there's no flame at all, and they need fanning to get going as well. So I don't know if you know people who you just 1 minute you think they're wonderful to be around, the next minute there's no energy, there's no joke telling, there's no storytelling. It's like quite
Which reminds me of a boyfriend, actually.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that is such a good description. That's,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
they have this thing where they can be absolutely full of joy, and yet a day later or 2 days later, or whatever, there's a real lack of joy as well. So they can sometimes suffer from a sort of minor depression, if you like, because it's so bright one day, and yet the next day there's no one home, kind of thing.
Hmm. That's difficult, isn't it?
Yes, 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 yes.
Um,
What one has to remember that all five of these are within all of us. So you might think, oh, I know a fire, but it's just as valuable to recognize the fire within you, because we all have these elements. We can all burn brightly 1 minute, and the fire is diminished the next. Uh, Even if we're not fires, we have that within us. Same with wood. We all feel strongly about certain things. That's our wood, you know.
mhm.
So
Yes, and that's the point of the exercise, isn't it? To identify these elements not only as a character description in others or ourselves,
yeah,
but also as aspects of our psyche. Uh,
absolutely, absolutely. And it teaches us to be really compassionate with ourselves as well as others, and that's so important. Um, I've been studying this for years, and I've learnt to be so compassionate with people, because you recognize what people's struggles are,
mm,
and equally I noticed my struggles within myself about these, you know, and it just teaches you compassion, and that's such a valuable tool, as we all know.
Let's come back to how we might help each other based on an understanding of elements. But why
Hmm.
don't you go on describing to us the main characteristics for the rest of them? So
Yes, of course.
Earth is next, right?
Yeah, Earth is next. I'm going to let you into a secret. This is my particular element. Um, Earth people um, uh, have a great sense of community, great sense of family. They love having people. They love getting people together. Uh, it, there's a great nurturing aspect to Earth. A lot of people in the caring professions at Earth, because they feel very natural. It feels very natural to them to look after people, to nourish people. Um, Before I was in complementary medicine, I was a waiter, and I just love looking after people. I like to make sure that people's meals were enjoyable, and that's very much in my nature. Um, the flip side is that they can put other people's needs before their own. So um, that sort of caring nature can go over the top, and they stop looking after themselves. And of course, if you're not in a good place, you can't give to others. So that's an important thing for Earth, that they look after themselves as well as they look after others.
Mm.
Um, they can be prone to worrying. That's their sort of default emotion. They can be prone to just overthinking about things and worrying, and that can be their weakness. Um, but yeah, they're a good type.
I'm sure, judging
I would
by
I would
your good self, yeah. Yeah, seems all right. Okay, thank you
yeah.
for that.
Yeah. One more thing about Earth is that food is quite important to them. The organs related to Earth's from a Chinese point of view is the stomach and spleen, which is very much to do with digestion. So they can seek solace in food. Um, so, I mean, that's one thing where I've noticed in my time in my life, when I've been under pressure, I seek comfort in food, and can be prone to putting on a little bit of weight because of that, which is very different to wood, which doesn't have that relationship. So woods can be a very, very good frame. Often Earth can put on a pound or two. So yeah, that's one thing I have to watch.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's good
yeah.
to know.
Metals, very special, very special element. I say that because um, one of the things about metals is they really see the preciousness and poignancy of life. They can be quite reflective people. They can be introspective. Um, they often look for perfection in their lives as well. So often when you go out and you see people and they are dressed just perfectly, just beautifully, that's often a metal thing where they really take a lot of care about their appearance, and um, they really they're really tuned into the finer things in life as well. Um, I I'm going to describe what I consider to be a metal moment. So sorry, I'm just going back to the um, perfectionism and reverence of life that metals see. So when you go into a really special um, uh, environment. Um, I have this when I go into an art gallery, or when I go into a cathedral or something. This sense of awe when you see something and it just touches your spirit in a very deep place. That is what I describe as a metal reaction. So I've had this when I went to the Grand Canyon, and I was just speechless by how magnificent it was and how awesome it was. And that's a real connection with your metal. So metals have that response to things like, you know, their work. They really treasure it. It's very precious to them. And as I said about their appearance, they often spend a lot of time and energy into really looking their absolute best. That's a real metal quality. So that's why I said that it's a very special element from that point of view.
And what's the downside to the metal element?
Well, as I said, there can be quite, the introspection is part of it. Their perfectionism can lead to you know, just overdoing that. They can become a little isolated in that sense of investing in themselves a little bit. So they they can struggle to connect with others as well. So fire is very gregarious, outgoing energy. Metal is much more internal as well. So you would see fire and metal not quite opposites, but they can be very distinct, those 2 points.
It'll be interesting to discuss relationships between people of different elements.
Yes,
Maybe
yes,
get to that later, but I'm
yes.
curious, what about the water element?
Okay, so the water's the last one. Okay, so water types are they can be very strong. Water is yeah, physically they can be very strong, um, very driven often, but that drive often comes from a place of fear. So I've got a friend of mine who is very successful in his career, but he confided to me that he's really driven by a sense of fear that it's all going to fall apart. But he works tremendously hard, but it's all coming from a place of he doesn't want it to go wrong. He's got this sort of voice in his head that it could collapse at any moment, but it drives him forward. So that they're often very powerful people because of that. But it's the fear is kind of at the root of this as well. Uh, Equally, so they're driven by fear, but there's also can be a lack of fear as well. So waters are interesting. They're the sort of people who might do things like parachute jumps or driving their cars ridiculously fast. You know, they might be, you know, motor racing drivers or something like that. They have this relationship with fear where they're driven by fear, but they also have a lack of fear as well. They like to test, they like to challenge their fears as well. But
How fascinating. I mean, if I think of the astrological signs, and water is usually associated with being artistic and sensitive. What you're describing sounds like quite a daredevil type of personality.
can be, definitely, definitely. I've spoken to waters, and they are fascinating. They would go into a room, and one of the first things they would do is check where the fire exit is. They would check where the windows are. They would almost have this idea of, right, if something happens like a fire or a explosion, they will know exactly what to do. They're really tuned into danger and the potential of it. And they're often incredible in a crisis because they've thought about everything before. Yeah, I've got a member of my family who's water, and when something happens, like a candle, you know, a candle suddenly sets fire to a piece of paper or something like that, she is the calmest person in the room because she's already 2 steps ahead of everyone else with the potential dangers that are happening. So it's a really quite a fascinating relationship they have with fear.
Goodness me, this is really interesting. I'm gonna stop my share. I'll bring it back on a larger screen.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, I want to know more. I'd like to hear more about how to support each other based
Mm,
on our understanding of elements as well
mm.
as ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, going into crisis potentially and the challenges we're facing today, perhaps.
Well, gosh, I think probably the most important, m- you know, I think probably the most important person to start with is yourself. And that's what the five elements teach about ourselves. And it, you know, in order for us to help others, really uh, we have to look after ourselves. So once we understand which of those five elements probably is the thing that predominates at that moment in time, then uh, we're in a much stronger position to help. And then, as I said earlier, the five elements teach us so much about compassion and understanding of how people are reacting to things. It's really helped my personal relationships knowing this because I can understand where people are coming from, and so I cut them a lot of slack because I understand that they're, if they're waters, they're scared, or if they're fires, joy their joy is burning brightly one day, but maybe not so much the next. And I can really understand people and help, understand them better for that.
So the thing to look for is the dominant emotional
Yes,
response of
yes,
the person.
absolutely.
Okay.
And there's going to be a pattern through our lives where we think, oh, this is what's going on for me most of the time. Having said that, there are, the five elements, as I said earlier, the five elements are within all of us. So we have to recognize that, we're going to have periods in our life where our fire is going to burn very brightly. I mean, if you go to I go to music festivals in the summer, and there's going to be a lot of partying for 2 or 3 days in a row. Well, my fire is going to burn very brightly during that time. And then when I come back, there's going to be a bit of a slump. That's a very natural thing. So even though I'm personally not a fire person, I recognize that, something like a party is going to bring up my fire. And then when I leave the party, my fire is going to drop. And um, yeah, that's the way of it. And it's very healthy for us to explore all five of those elements, all five elements, but one is going to predominate through one's life.
Hmm. So, say this situation here where we have the self-isolation
Yes,
guidelines and
yes,
all these restrictions. People
yes,
might not be working.
yes,
There could be all kinds of pressures at this time.
of course.
Um, could we go through each element and um, have a hypothetical scenario? How might that element respond to such a situation? How can we support it?
Yeah, sure, sure. So let me start with water first, because that's probably the most obvious, where, as I said, the emotion related to water is fear. And of course, there's over the last few weeks for everyone, this is terribly scary. The idea that there's this virus floating around, that it's likely to touch many of us and affect our health. So there's a lot of waters are going to really have their fear brought up to them. And in fact, let's face it, you don't have to be water to experience fear at a time like this. Um, so I think we just have to put it into perspective. Obviously, we need to look after ourselves. That goes without saying. But if we're feeling and excessive amounts of fear, then I think we have to learn to reassure ourselves, to really work with reassurance. It's that inner dialogue of really looking after ourselves in that respect. So Um, so yeah, that's water. Now wood, they have a very, very strong sense of justice and really tuned into injustice. There's going to be a lot of injustices going on at the moment. People are very, very sadly, they're going to die prematurely. And this is where woods are really going to feel that sense of justice and injustice more than all the others. Um, and again, it's just about being in balance. Woods really prosper by exercise. Uh, Yoga is fantastic for for wood people to do a lot of stretching and that allows them to come back into their body rather than being in their heads as well. Um, fires are really going to miss out at the moment with parties. Parties aren't happening. Parties can only happen on the online. So fires are going to be really challenged by um, yeah the festivities being put on hold. So again, what I recommend for fires is to really go within, to really um, uh, be reassured that it's not forever, and reach out to people as much as you can online and with phone calls, etc. So yeah, that's very much the fire reaction at the moment. Earths are going to be really worried about others. That's their that's their sort of default, is that they want to nurture, they want to care for others, they want to bring people together, which is not possible at this moment in time. So again, I'm an earth. I find meditation very, very helpful for me. It just takes me out of that sense of worry that I was talking about.
Very
And then
interesting. Thank you. Any particular type of meditation or any particular practices for the elements so far? You mentioned the yoga for the
yoga,
wood
yeah,
element.
yeah, yoga is fantastic for woods in particular. And let's remember that all of us have the five elements within us. So um, you might be fanatical about yoga, but you're not necessarily a wood. But it's just good for your own personal wood element. Uh,
And for the water types, any particular practice that you think?
Yeah, I think I tell you what's really good for waters is Tai Chi and Qigong is really good. It's physical. Waters are often strong people, as I said. They're quite. You often see a guy. I've known a couple of guys who are very strong bones, like really. I'm going to use the word stocky, which isn't quite the right word, but just strong, like strong joints. That's often water types. And I think Tai Chi and Qigong is just so good for water types to just come in their body. It really nourishes their kidneys, which is the organ associated with water types from a Chinese point of view.
Great, okay. So what's next? Is it the metal element?
Yes, metals. Yeah, gosh, metals again. Um, one of the one of the chief emotions associated with metals is the sense of loss or sense of um, bereavement, and so um, obviously there's a lot of that going on for people at the moment. Not only about the potential of very tragically losing people, but also the loss of what we had. I mean, 2 or 3 months ago, we were all conducting our lives perfectly, in a normal fashion, and we've lost that. We're all in our homes. We're isolated. We can't see our families. We can't see our friends. It's a really big sense of loss that metals are going to have at the moment, and they can retreat into themselves because of that. And again, it's a bit like fires. It's just really, really good for them. Really important for them to connect with people as best they can, phone calls and Zoom calls or whatever. Just really, really important. Otherwise, they can get a bit isolated. That's the
Yeah, that
potential.
resonates. And yeah, well, you seem to think metal is an element. I think I will agree with you. And here we are having a Zoom call. Yeah.
Yes.
Great, fantastic. Um, how can we help another person? So I guess reassurance is what you offer
Yes.
people would
Yes. Yes.
keeping the spirits high somehow for fire element.
Exactly. Exactly. Um,
Can't think. The wood? What about a wood type? How can
would
you support a wood?
um, well, it's woods. Uh, woods. Yeah, woods are going to feel quite strongly about things. You know, as I said, you know, they feel very strongly about um, uh, when things aren't right. So you know, uh, sort of just listening to them and just being really considerate about what they're going through as well. Woods can often get when things aren't working well in society or things like that, they can get a really strong sense of frustration and they can be a bit sort of they can be a bit chippy. I don't know if you know that word. It is a bit cross about things and yeah, you just have to be. It's just really good to be compassionate with people like that, and just allow them to be frustrated and anger. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just obviously when it boils over, that becomes a bit damaging. But there's nothing wrong with being cross about things. It's a good energy, anger. It's a very positive energy. But just allowing people to be like that, and then that will that will nourish woods, and then they're much less likely to boil over into being furious about something, you know?
Yes, I guess the last thing you'd want to do is to get into an abrasive argument
Yes,
in that highly emotional
yeah,
state.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, and
Woods exercises, as I said about woods as well. Yoga is great. So we're, you know, here in the UK, we're allowed to go for walks as part of our exercise. That's very important for woods to go for walks and just blow a few cobwebs away. You know, that's very good.
okay, and for the metal element, feeling that loss and that grief.
Yeah, um, just really understanding that metals can become introspective, can become potentially over reflective as well. So let's say if you feel that a member of your family or partner is a metal, just observe that they can they can sort of disappear into themselves a little bit and just be really mindful of that and just um, they respond well to nurture and nourishment and care just like everyone else, you know.
And this already makes me think that metal and earth are a fantastic combination, right?
Yeah, it is a good combination. Yes, it is a good
Yeah.
combination. There's also the very interesting fire and water, which is obviously opposite natural phenomena.
Yes.
And I often see couples who are fire and water, and somehow or other the water balances the fire balances the water. It's quite a dynamic combination, that one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, fantastic. So it's good to think, who are my friends and
yes,
who's a good person to
yes,
connect with at
yes,
this time.
yes. Also, you know, there are times in all of our lives when, even though we might not be, let's say something like metal. Now, metal, I talked about metal being the emotion relates. Metal is often a sense of loss, a sense of bereavement. Now, I remember when I lost my mother a few years ago, and I really got into this sort of metal energy. I was deep sense of loss for quite a while, and even though I'm not metal, I really experienced what it was to be metal for a year or so. And that's a very natural thing. If we're going to lose someone as close as a parent or something like that, then we're gonna go into a big sense of loss and poignancy and sadness. That's a very natural thing. So, yeah.
Are there any other things that can support us? For example, types of foods we can go for. I know you mentioned Earth has to be a bit careful about comfort
Yeah,
eating.
yes, exactly. Yes, that's right. Certain foods support us better than others, and I think we all know that. So things like eating good vegetables is better than eating ice cream, for instance. So Earths can have a sweet tooth, and they can fall into eating a little too much chocolate or something like that, and that's not going to support their energy if they do it to excess. So
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
okay. Um, This is very interesting. I'm just thinking from what I know of the system is the associations of the organs and the elements,
yes,
and also the tastes, right? The quality of taste,
yes.
the certain foods. Is there something you can share with us? Just a few practical bits of information that could help us.
Well, again, the diagnosis is really it's not easy, to be frank with you, but there are colours that are involved with the facial colors with these elements. Now, if you see someone with a really quite white complexion, really like sort of a lack of color in their face, that's often an indication that someone is metal. And
But
it,
true.
and bizarrely, you can see a blue hue in the face for someone who's
Interesting.
water as well. I mean,
Interesting.
you have to train your eye. It's not that easy. But sometimes you get people and you think, blimey, that's a blue color in that person. And fires can often be very red, particularly when their fire is burning brightly. So you might go to a party and someone is holding court, making loads of jokes, and you look at their color, and that's quite a red color. That's a real indication of fire as well. So you can do a visual diagnosis as well as the emotional diagnosis. Um, and there's also sounds in people's voices as well. Fires are really interesting. They can often say something and then laugh, and it's almost like an inappropriate laugh they have. Like they say something that's not particularly funny, and then there's followed by a laughter. That's like, where did that laughter come from? That's interesting. That's an indication that someone's fire. Um, there's considered a singing tone to Earths. So when Earths talk, they can often go up and down. It's like this sort of almost melodic quality to their voice. So that's another means of diagnosis as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then bizarrely, there's also the smells as well, which is not easy. But I sometimes pick that up in my treatment room when someone comes in and particularly when they're having a tough time, there's a little crisis going on in their life, and they're out of balance. So fires have a slightly scorched smell to them. Earths have a sweet smell, which actually sounds nice, but it isn't that nice. I can say that because I'm Earth. But yes, it's a slightly musty, sweet smell
Okay.
of that. Yeah. So they're smells related
Very
to.
interesting. You haven't said about the metal. I'm curious. What about the voice, or the sound
Okay,
of the
so
voice?
the voices can. Okay, so the textbook term for a metal voice is weeping. Okay,
Oh, wow.
so so the idea is that the voice can be a little stuck in the throat, a little
Okay.
bit in the chest. Uh, can Where fires are like gregarious, outrageous, metals can be quite timid. So a perfect example might be when a metal has come and he or she has suffered from, let's say, a loss, a bereavement, or loss of a job or something like that. They're going to be feeling really quite vulnerable in a situation like that, understandably. So their voice might be a little bit weeping, sense of bereavement in the voice, a little timidity in the voice, perhaps. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Is there some form of exercise that, or other practice that is good for metal?
Um, Metals are often very creative. And remember, I was talking to you about uh, metals are often the best dressed people. they often, they just, there's something incredibly impressive about the way metals choose all the best clothes or something like that. You know, their sense of perfectionism is fantastic. So they're very creative. So to invest in a creative um, something creative is just very, very nourishing for them.
Hmm.
So you know, like there's a lot, artists might be metals, or you know, it could be anything. I've actually I follow football, and I noticed that there's quite a few footballers who are metals, and it's often because they've invested so much energy into their you know their craft that they become the best. You know, they 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 strive to be the best. It was really strong, and so they often become the best. You know, yeah. I have a sense that Roger Federer is metal, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I have a
How
sense. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It's just, it's always. I don't know if you ever see him, but he always looks perfect, and and I, you know, without doubt, he's incredibly talented, but he's really invested so much time in being the best. You know, so
I guess the perfectionism and the excellence
yes, yes,
are kind of
yes,
fit in
yes,
this category. Yeah,
yes,
I don't know about the best dressed here,
yes.
but
I remember
but
a
hey.
couple of times when he's won a big tournament, or actually when he's lost a big tournament as well. You know that at the end of a big tournament they get the presentation and they often interview him. Now, more than once, I've seen Roger Federer burst into tears, and both when he's won and when he's lost. It's just, you know, it's just the poignancy of the occasion.
Yes,
It's
yes,
really huge.
I can sense that. Wow. How fascinating. All right, so to get back into a state of equilibrium, we would we would first of all have an awareness where we are, and
Yeah,
then
very much.
um, pacify the negative aspect and try to bring out more of our positive side, right?
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah, support a positive expression.
Yes.
Um,
And it, you know, it's really about looking after ourselves and just understanding what's good for us and yeah, investing in ourselves, all the elements. And that goes, you know, it's just, we flourish at our best when we invest in ourselves and do the best things for us.
yeah. Now there is a book you recommended if someone wants to find out a bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, well, I was very fortunate to study under this couple. They're called Angela and John Hicks. Uh, they run a college where I studied in Reading, which is a Five Element School of Acupuncture. They're real experts at their field, and they wrote this beautiful book called Healing Your Emotions, which is available, and it really goes much deeper into all of this. So, if you'd like to know more, I'd say that's a wonderful resource.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think it's time to start wrapping up.
Yeah.
It's been so interesting. I just want to put it into practice with all my friends now.
Yes, 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 yes. It's fascinating when we have the tools to look at people. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any final messages? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just going back to the fact that you know you might identify one element as being your element, but do not forget we have all five elements within us, and therefore we have a relationship with all five. And yeah, that's really important. All of us would be fascinated to know which element is our element, and that's great. It's a great adventure, but it's so important to remember that we have all five within us.
Wonderful. And anyone watching this, why don't you share? What is your element, and
Yeah, yeah.
what are you doing about it? How are you
Okay. Well,
expressing? How are you
I,
balancing it?
yeah. So I'm Earth, and yeah. I mean the challenge for us is that, as I said before, that I have been known to put other people's needs before my own. I mean, I'm a practitioner, so I'm treating people 5 or 6 days a week and really investing in them, and I can slip up and get tired and not and see that late in the day that I need to look after myself. Um, and also food as well. I've said before that I can slip into comfort eating, and that's a challenge for me because I love food, but yeah, it's important to eat the right foods. Yeah.
I'm just curious now that you talked about your experience with your element at this time. Um, has this special situation we find ourselves in brought you any added insight, or have you come up with some decision that, okay, now I realize I have to stop doing this moving forward after this crisis is over, I commit to, have you had some
Hmm.
thoughts like that? I mean, probably not because you've been practicing for so long, you're so
Oh
self-aware,
no,
but
no. On the contrary, I mean, so I had a week which was horrible. The government here in the UK brought in social distancing a few weeks ago. I had a full um, week of appointments. Everyone cancelled,
mm,
and it's the most horrible thing. Horrible for all of us. But yeah, I just felt like my practice was falling through my fingers, and the sense of worry and confusion going on for me was horrible. But then obviously we're all having to learn to adapt, and there's so many people around the world are lost their work and financial worries, and dare I say health worries as well. It's a really challenging time. So I think it's just recognizing what's good for us and doing as much of it as we can. So I recognize meditation is very good for me. So I've been meditating more than ever. Well, I've got time on my hands, obviously,
mm.
but yeah. And then things for something like talking about wood, walking and exercise, fires, being in contact with people as best they can. Um, I recommended Qigong and Tai Chi for water types, and creative output for metals. I think it's very positive thing as well.
Yes, for me, definitely. Creative projects, connecting with people
Yeah.
is what really keeps me in balance at
Yeah,
this time.
yeah,
Yeah, thank God.
yeah,
Thank God for technology and all these great ideas
yeah, 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 yeah,
that come up. So,
yeah.
thank you once again, Crispin. It's been an absolute delight. Thank you for sharing so
My
much
pleasure.
valuable insight and practical tools.
My pleasure.
And connect with you again sometime, hopefully in better circumstances
Yes, yes, yes. On the other side.
on the other side.
Yeah.
On the other side. Thank you. Have a
Okay.
great day. Bye for now.
Bye bye.